The Language and Identity of Kanye West by Popthorn. Kanye West is an African-American rapper born and raised in Chicago. As a rapper, he is part of the hip-hop culture, which is a diverse art movement that was founded by and is still most predominant in African-American communities. The most culturally prominent aspect of hip-hop is rapping, which is why throughout this presentation, I will be using the terms hip-hop identity and rapper identity interchangeably. He also lives up to many stereotypes about rappers. Common rapper stereotypes include frequent substance abuse, lust, boastfulness, and violence. He is also devoutly Christian and has a family with 4 children. Christians try to avoid indulging in the 7 deadly sins, including wrath, lust, greed, gluttony, sloth, envy, and pride. You may have noticed that each sin basically corresponds with a rapper stereotype, begging the question, how can West's hip-hop identity and Christian identity coexist? In this presentation, I will be analyzing how identity and culture are expressed in the language of visual art and rap lyrics. I will do this by analyzing Kanye West's Christian identity and his hip-hop identity through a close analysis of his albums My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and The Life of Pablo. West examines the sinful nature of his hip-hop identity on his album My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. This is exemplified on the album cover, which depicts West while drunk and having sex with a chimera-like monster. This demonstrates his hip-hop identity, as a stereotype of rappers is that their lifestyle is centered around sex, money, and drugs. West details this lifestyle in the album's lyrics, starting with how his personal identity has been influenced by hip-hop culture ever since he was young. He starts the first verse of the opening track Dark Fantasy with, I fantasized about this back in Chicago, mercy, mercy me, that mercy Alago. West states that he fantasized about the stereotypical rapper lifestyle that he is currently living when he was growing up as a kid in Chicago, revealing that hip-hop identity has been ingrained in his personal identity since he was young. The following line alludes to Marvin Gaye's song Mercy, Mercy Me, demonstrating his familiarity with African-American music culture. He also uses the jargon Murcielago, which is the name of a luxury Lamborghini, highlighting hip-hop culture's obsession with luxury products. In the subsequent lines, West affirms his hip-hop identity by describing rapper stereotypes. He says, how you say broke in Spanish, mi no hablo. This line conveys that he is rich by saying that the word broke is not in his vocabulary. He continues with, me drown sorrow in that diablo. The word diablo in this line means demon, and it is used to symbolize sin and how he indulges in sinful activities like sex and drinking. He ends with, me found bravery in my bravado. The final line states that he is confident and boastful. These 3 lines connect to perfectly describe stereotypes about the rapper identity, as he is boasting about his wealth, sex, alcohol, and confidence. The lines are unified by their use of code switching, anaphora, and rhyme by using Spanish phrases and starting each sentence with me and ending with an O sound. The dark and evil tone of the lyrics and artwork evoke negative feelings towards the lifestyle that West is rapping about. This foreshadows the identity conflict that he addresses on a subsequent album. West tackles the conflict between his hip-hop identity and Christian identity on his album The Life of Pablo. This is exemplified on the album's cover, which includes a photo of a wedding along with a swimsuit model, with text asking which one. Between the release of the 2 albums, West got married and started a family. The artwork reflects West's struggle to choose between his identity as a Christian family man and his sinful hip-hop identity. Additionally, West has also stated in interviews that the name Pablo in the album's title refers to many well-known figures such as Picasso, Pablo Escobar, and St. Paul the Apostle. Each Pablo represents one of West's identities, with Escobar representing his sinful hip-hop identity and St. Paul representing his Christian identity. Thus, the artwork and the title reveal that this album will tackle the dichotomy between his hip-hop identity and his Christian identity. Starting with West worrying about the impact that his hip-hop identity could have on his family. On the 4th verse of the song Wolves, West addresses his wife and says, I said, baby, what if you was clubbing, thugging, hustling before you met your husband? West ponders what could have happened if he had met his wife while they were indulging in sinful activities that are associated with the hip-hop lifestyle. His use of ebonic slang, such as the words clubbin', thuggin', hustlin', and hella, indicate that these activities symbolize hip-hop culture, as the dialect is often associated with hip-hop. West then asks, what if Mary was in the club for she met Joseph around hella thugs? The rapper uses parallelism by repeating the previous sentence structure, but replacing the words you and husband with Mary and Joseph, comparing himself and his wife to the biblical couple Joseph and the Virgin Mary. Through the 2 rhetorical questions, West reflects on his identity. wondering how his marriage could have turned out if he had swayed more towards the stereotypes of his hip-hop identity instead of affirming his authentic identity, which is centered around Christianity. He also wants Christianity to shelter his children from the negative influences of hip-hop culture. He tells his wife to cover their daughter, Nori, in lamb's wool. "We surrounded by the fucking wolves." And he says the same for his son, Saint. The words lamb and wolves allude to Christian literature where lambs symbolize Jesus, and since wolves prey on lambs, wolves symbolize sinful influences. Thus, West wants to instill his Christian identity in his children to steer them away from the dangerous hip-hop culture that surrounds them. Each of the albums that I have mentioned present opposing sides of Kanye West's identity. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy glorifies the stereotypes of his rapper identity, while on The Life of Pablo, West tries to shun this aspect of his identity to protect his relationship with his family. The first album shows him boasting about his sinful indulgences that were inspired by hip-hop culture, while the latter sees him embracing his religious identity by doubting his bad behavior and trying to protect his children from following the same path. Unsurprisingly, West was diagnosed with bipolar disorder a few years after the release of these two albums, and earlier this year, his wife filed for divorce. West's music shows listeners that identities this extreme cannot peacefully coexist, and that if Joseph and Mary had met in a club, there would likely be no Jesus. Thank you.